dime lo que tú quieres de mi coqueta. Sé lo que te gusta es salir y se suelta. Cuando baila reggaetón pa' mí que muñeca. Le gusta salir y seducir. Dime lo que tú quieres de mi coqueta. Sé lo que te gusta es salir y se suelta. Cuando baila reggaetón pa' mí que muñeca. Le gusta salir y seducir. Dale chiquitita, dame más. Qué bonita que te quiere controlar. Ella dice que me quiere controlar. Nosotros los vamos a develar más. Dime, ¿cómo tú te quieres venir más? Dime, ¿cómo los vamos a conocer más? Dime, no te quiero solo ver, quiero compartirte. Quiero que te vean y te siguen. Soy un bandolero, le gusta ver una coqueta. Dime cómo suena la pobreza. Sé que tú supiste que tú fuiste la coqueta. Tú siempre fuiste la coqueta. Dime lo que tú quieres de mi coqueta. Sé lo que te gusta es salir y se suelta. Cuando baila reggaetón pa' mí que muñeca. Le gusta salir y seducir. Dime. Soy un bandolero, le gusta ver una coqueta. Soy un bandolero, le gusta ver una coqueta. Dime cómo suena la pobreza. Tú siempre fuiste la coqueta. Dime lo que tú quieres de mi coqueta. Sé lo que te gusta es salir y se suelta. Cuando baila reggaetón pa' mí que muñeca. Le gusta salir y seducir.
Test. Okay. I think everybody can hear me. Yes. Welcome everybody to another hybrid event here at Tech Square ATL Social Club, where we are the members-only community connecting individuals and companies seeking productive collaborations to a curated environment that fosters growth and innovation. So we are here in the Clubhouse, and we're doing one of these hybrid events again. This is the second one where we have some in person, some live, so they can ask questions. But we're all very socially distant and masked when I'm not talking on the microphone or drinking or eating. So what are we doing here today? We're here, we have a panel, 4-person panel with those in the space industry. So we're here to kind of share those stories of, well, how do you go from a degree or research into kind of the professional world? And what is it really like? So not everybody that's in any sort of aeronautical space is going to be an astronaut, even though maybe some of you are still hoping to be. We'll see. We'll get into that in a bit. And so if you have any questions and you're watching live, please let us know in the chat. We'll go ahead and start introducing our panel, and I'll get them to talk about a little bit where their interest in aeronautical stuff came from. So first we have Phil Clifton. Let me get you live there. So Phil is a graduate research assistant at Georgia Tech at the Space Systems Design Lab. So what was your original motivation and kind of what do you do now on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So can everyone hear me all right? Great. So when I was in high school, the classes I was the most attracted to, really all throughout school, but especially in high school, I kind of noticed that my passion was not in history, it was not in English or literature. The stuff that I was good at, the stuff that I liked doing was mathematics, was science. And my physics professor pushed me to go study engineering at university.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about engineering in high school. I just knew that they did similar stuff to what I did in physics class. And so I was like, okay, let me investigate this further. I spent a summer trying to learn all about the different kinds of engineering. And I saw aerospace engineering, I saw all the cool stuff that they got to do, kind of like a blend of all these other types of engineering, mechanical, electrical, and a lot of software development or computer science. And so I decided, hey, I'll go try that out at university. If it works for me, it works for me. If not, I can always switch. But I got to Georgia Tech, and I really love the aerospace program here. So after I finished my bachelor's last spring, I came back this fall to start my master's. And I've been doing research, I was doing research as an undergrad, and I'm continuing research this year looking at mega constellations of satellites. So Starlink, Kuiper, OneWeb, Kepler or Ursa Major systems, and many other kinds of mega constellations.
Nice. Yeah, well, we'll definitely talk about Starlink in a second, for sure. Next, we have Blake Teedy, and he is a Georgia Tech Aerospace Engineering student. But you've done some former NASA software development with an internship. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about that and kind of your original inspiration into the aerospace field.
Yeah, hey, I'm Blake Teedy again. I am a grad student at Georgia Tech. I currently am a researcher in the Aerospace System Design Lab, which is different than the Space System Design Lab, even though it is just 4 letters off. So, to be honest, like, when I think back to the first thing that got me interested in the space industry, literally was in elementary school. We had a program where the safety patrol, which was like these like 5th graders that would help the other kids cross the street, all went to space camp. And I was not in safety patrol, but I actually got a scholarship to go to space camp for a weekend. So I went to space camp, fell in love with it ever since. Finally decided to do undergrad at Aerospace here at Georgia Tech, and now I'm a grad student. Yeah, my research right now is a lot around, I do a few NASA electric propulsion for aircraft, not for spacecraft, but I have also done research in a few areas. I'm currently on a grand challenge team for a experimental fixed wing project that would try to land a fixed wing aircraft on Titan, which is a moon of Saturn. So I know a lot about like NASA missions and like things to do that would like make them possible. And I do a lot of entry, descent, and landing stuff too.
All right, well, thank you. And next we have Rohan Sahani, who's a Georgia Tech Aerospace Engineering student and also a former NASA software development intern. I think I said that wrong the last time. You were the Aerospace Systems Lab, Blake. Sorry about that. So, how about you tell me about that internship there?
Yeah,
Rohan?
absolutely. So like you said earlier, I'm a 3rd-year AE student at Georgia Tech. After my freshman year, actually, is when I completed my NASA internship at the Johnson Space Center. I was working on flight software development for the exercise lab. We were focusing on exercise flight software, mainly on the International Space Station, but hoping to transfer some of the software onto the mission to the moon and then mission to Mars. So the team of interns and I, at the end of our internship, had developed a software that tracked the center of pressure of astronauts working out on ARED, which is the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device. So that's one of the machines that astronauts use to kind of weight lift, do bench presses, squats, things along those lines. And we felt that it was really important for astronauts to kind of get that kind of feedback, because especially for long duration missions, i.e. like going to Mars, the big concern is that during microgravity, your muscles and bones will start to degrade. So the doctors and physical therapists really want to make sure that astronauts are working out properly and that they're working out their body in an efficient manner. So for example, if you're doing bench presses and you're really loading your right side of your leg rather than if you're doing squats and you're loading your right side rather than your left side, eventually you're going to throw your body out of alignment, and that could lead to more injuries in the long run. Yeah. So just trying to mitigate some of those risks is what we worked on.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, obviously you don't want to lose any of that density, especially when we're hoping to travel further to conquer other planets. I guess maybe occupy other planets. Maybe that's the wrong word. But last but not least, we have Gary ONeil, he actually was telling me a little bit about studying bone crushing a little bit ago and how they used to do it. I'm using your own words, kind of medieval practices. But why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about your background. You're a senior aerospace and defense specialist, and you're with the Georgia Department of Economic Development. So kind of tell us a quick story of kind of your path here to Georgia Tech, and then what you're doing currently in the aeronautical field.
Sure. Well, my path to Georgia Tech started a long time ago, and I came here in the 1970s as a student, as an ROTC scholarship. And at the time, like everybody else, I was very motivated to want to become a jet pilot and go to the astronaut program and that sort of thing. The Navy had different ideas. I was a helicopter pilot instead, but that's okay. But along the way, I did obviously interact with people that were doing things with the space program. I have a good friend who, as a helicopter pilot, was in fact a astronaut candidate for a while. So after being in the Navy for a long time, I retired after 25 years. I came back to Georgia Tech as a researcher at GTRI and switched over to the School of Aerospace Engineering, where I'm kind of an invisible part of the faculty while I'm working here for the Department of Economic Development. And my work is to help aerospace companies in Georgia connect with whatever they need to be successful. And as we were talking about before we started, people typically think about aerospace in Georgia as being, Lockheed or Gulfstream and nothing in between. But actually, there's a growing cluster of companies related to space and pretty high-tech stuff here in Georgia, and more particularly, a couple of really cool companies right here in the Atlanta area.
Yeah.
So I've been interacting with them on and off over the past couple of years.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You'll hear some sound behind me because we have all the garage doors open behind me, so to let that airflow. So let's get started with some questions. And I guess what I'll do is, well, I'll let any of you speak up if you're really excited. We can start with George if you want. But looking for what's a future NASA mission? So it could be Mars or anything else. Is there anything, does anybody want to start with something that's on their mind just this week?
Sure. I'll go ahead and start, I guess. So one that I'm really looking forward to, and it's probably one that people have heard about a lot in the media recently, is Artemis. Go ahead and start, I guess. So one that I'm really looking forward to, and it's probably one that people have heard about a lot in the media recently, is Artemis. So sending the first woman and the next man to the moon. And this one I think is especially important, not just for NASA, not just for the United States. We left, we did a lot of amazing science. We left permanent human trace there, but we did not establish a permanent human presence on the moon. And I think that to be able to venture farther out into the solar system, it is imperative that we have the ability to use the moon or cislunar space in general as a launch platform to be able to send missions, whether crewed or uncrewed, farther out. Thinking about serving as a hub for space transportation to and from Earth. This is the kind of stuff that's 100, 200 years out, but I think it's imperative that we, use the closest celestial body to us as sort of a place to engage in trial and error, see what works, what doesn't work, start developing the technologies that are going to help us overcome the most significant difficulties in establishing permanent human presence on other celestial bodies, like radiation shielding, life support systems, self-sustainability, and all of that kind of stuff. And I know that Georgia Tech, and I think ASDL actually, puts out quite a few research papers on these kinds of fantastical ideas of colonizing the moon, colonizing Mars, and all of the sorts of logistics and systems engineering that goes into that.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a space aircraft carrier or something like that. You land, take off. So, and for those who don't know, who is the Artemis project being backed by? Is it Artemis?
I'm sorry?
Who is it being backed by? Like who's
like the organization it's a NASA mission.
Okay, direct NASA. Cool. Anything? Is there any other ones, or anybody want to add something to that?
Yeah, you just kind of echo the Artemis program. I think specifically like Lunar Gateway to me sounds really exciting. The fact that I guess you're kind of building like a mini International Space Station around the moon itself to kind of do some of those things where you can dock and kind of provide like a mini launch pad in a sense going to Mars. And I think in terms of Mars, in like sci-fi movies, it's always been portrayed as something kind of like unachievable or like a dream. You see like Martians, aliens, that kind of thing. But I think the point at when if it's the United States or whatever country in the world that ends up getting to Mars first, I think that'll just kind of be a new threshold for what we as like humans on Earth can really accomplish. And I think for like younger generations especially, I think it'll be like a really huge like inspiration in a way of what really is possible for mankind.
Well, unless anybody has any other projects, go ahead, George.
Well, I have one. There's a upcoming Mars mission where they're going to fly an aircraft in the Martian atmosphere. And that, to me, is just a really cool project because it is so different.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is much thinner. It's going to require a lot of challenging thinking and engineering to make it all work. So I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah. Combustion engines, what do you think? Batteries or...
I believe it's an electric drone,
I'm
but
just making sure.
it's a little baby helicopter that's going to leap out of the lander at some point and fly around. I think that's just a really cool concept.
All right. Well, cool. Those are exciting. I didn't even know about that one. So obviously renewed interest since the closing of the... So we had Virgin Galactic, we have Blue Origin and SpaceX being some of the most popular. With those things, what do you think is the next 5 years? What holds the future for space travel and NASA? Are these private companies good? I mean, I think they're probably generally good, but if you have a different opinion, does this kind of slingshot us into the future? Is competition good? And then how do we make sure that these new private companies work together in order to achieve these bigger goals?
I would love to speak to that a little bit. So the interesting thing with these new private companies, especially SpaceX, is that they're driving the price down for multiple different aspects of the aerospace industry. SpaceX has made it super cheap to launch a rocket because of their reusability that they've built in that really nobody else has been able to do, even on top of the shuttle, to be honest. You have other smaller companies coming out that are able to make satellites cheaper, smaller, more serialized, tons of different CubeSat companies that are really starting to develop. CubeSats are pretty much satellites that could probably be held in both my hands. And the capabilities of that are absolutely crazy because now you have something that's so small that you could just tack it onto another mission, but in it of itself could give you a completely new capability, give you a completely new data set. So with those, just tons of more information. I think even recently with the most recent Mars mission, we actually had the first time that they sent CubeSats to a different planet that wasn't just around Earth. And they provided a very basic function. They essentially just were a relay to send back information from the landing craft to Earth. But because of them, we got the first time actual data imagery coming down to the planet. So it's just those being able to make things cheaper that actually makes it accessible beyond just the largest companies.
Nice. So obviously, the economic impact and the cost of that, as these companies coming in, driving down that price, is going to allow even more companies to maybe come in later. I mean, we see this with our electronics here on Earth, right? So battery circuit boards. I mean, just look at RAM, memory, video cards, all that stuff. It's all kind of connected. I mean, so anybody else want to talk about the economic impact? I know. Okay, Bill.
Taking off my aerospace hat, putting on my finance hat, I think that Blake made a lot of really good points. So driving down the cost of access to space is imperative to be able to propel humanity's future farther into the cosmos, colonizing the moon, colonizing Mars, doing all these cool things. It's really important that we be able to get into space for very cheap. One of the really good ways to do that SpaceX has really capitalized on, and like Blake said, no one has been able to mimic successfully, is complete or near complete reusability of the entire launch vehicle. So now not only are the rockets coming back and landing themselves on dry land, on drone ships in the water, but the fairings are also falling back and they're reusing those. Standardization of hardware and electronics is going to be another really important driving factor into actually bringing down the cost of what you're sending into space. But I think that one of the interesting developments that at least I've noticed in, granted my very limited experience in the industry thus far, are that there are a lot of rocket startups and rocket companies out there. So you have the big ones. You have United Launch Alliance, who've been around forever. SpaceX, Blue Origin, who are kind of the new entrants into the heavy launch and medium launch markets. But there are a ton of startups all across the world that are trying to capture the niche of the small launch market. So basically launching things into space that are not very heavy, maybe 500 kilograms or less. So really small satellites or collections of cube satellites. But there's not enough, I mean, that's not a big enough market, and I don't know if it will ever be a big enough market for the 40 or 50 startups that are all vying for the same pretty small pie.
Right.
So to name some of the ones that have been pretty successful, Rocket Lab in New Zealand, technically an American company, but they launch out of New Zealand. They've been really successful at being able to have repetitive, standardized creation of launch vehicles for very cheap. They're not quite at the level of reusability that SpaceX is at. I don't think they're at any level of reusability, but that's something that they're targeting for a pretty short-term goal. And they're also starting to get into the standardization of satellite hardware with a new, basically CubeSat, but actually spherical satellite platform called Proton. So that's something that I think is pretty cool, and I think that kind of mentality is exactly what will help driving down the cost. But definitely one of the things I worry about is what kind of market-wide dynamics we're going to be seeing from the fact that there are 50, 60, maybe even 70 small launch startups all competing with one another. I mean, what's sexier than building a rocket? Not very much. And so I think that's why a lot of the entrepreneurs that come into the space industry tend to make a beeline to creating rockets. And that's great. We need that, but we only need so many people doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Gary, with the economic development, could you tell us what's happening here in Atlanta as far as what's going on with like maybe some of the smaller supportive companies that aren't building rockets? What's the impact on that for the future of the space program?
Well, as I said, there's a lot of tiny things going on. There's a company that just got a contract from the Air Force known as Hermeus.
Yeah, they were actually here for
They got $1.5 million to go design a Mach 5 passenger jet for the Air Force. And it's not space, but it's pretty darn close because it's going to be cruising pretty high. But as you say, the real economic benefit of space and where the money really isn't in the launch vehicle, and it's not in the satellite. It's the data that the satellite is bringing down to users for specific purposes. And we have Intelsat and Viasat right here in the Atlanta area, two large companies that are dealing with managing that data and moving it from where it needs to be to where it is to where it needs to be. And they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in just moving data. Enabled by the satellites that are out there. So the small satellite constellations that are coming up, I just read today on the way in that the Starlink satellite network was used for the first time by first responders in Los Angeles County as they're dealing with a wildfire, and they are just really, really impressed by it.
Yeah.
And so, ubiquitous, reliable, instantaneous communication has all sorts of applications and markets, and the value that the information brings will spur all kinds of economic development that we haven't even thought about yet. And that's the cool thing about the space program. I mean, from my era in the space program, we got the camcorders and we got computers and personal computers and things like that because the miniaturization had to happen because it was so expensive to get things into orbit. This next wave is going to be about something else. It's not going to be necessarily about hardware. It's going to be more about what information is used for what purposes. And hopefully it will have more value than sending banner ads and cat videos to the deeper reaches of Peru so that people can watch them there. Hopefully we'll get some real utility for things like disaster response, things like agriculture, and things like managing the oceans and the fisheries and things like that, where we would be able to have sufficient presence out in places we're not now, that we could learn things and use that knowledge to either develop new products or use that information in a positive way.
All right. Well, and this may be something nobody knows about, but I have a personal question and related to Starlink. It's all about communication. So communications and communications companies are probably watching Starlink very closely. And if anybody can explain Starlink after this real quick for anybody watching, they may not know exactly what this is. In fact, there are SpaceX launches scheduled right now. I think, was that the one that just got scrubbed for, was it for Starlink or was it for the other one?
I think it was the Starlink constellation for 60 satellites going up.
So that'll go up soon. Again, but communications, and as you were saying, we were talking about digital cameras, we're live streaming here, this, with HD video and, bandwidth keeps going on, but they are always talking about the infrastructure challenges here. So does Starlink, free that up? And when you're talking about data transmission and like beaming data back down, we saw with the Mars rover, to get the high quality image, it takes a long time, So do you think Starlink will be able to help in kind of data transfer handoff, sort of like a Wi-Fi mesh across the universe? And have any of you worked on any sort of communication stuff related to aerospace before? So who wants to explain? I know there's a lot of questions. Who wants to explain Starlink in layman's terms?
I feel like explaining Starlink is a pretty big job, but my research is in the realm of mega constellations and designing optimally sized and optimally configured mega constellations to minimize probability of conjunction, which is getting too close to another satellite with all the other resident space objects, and also with the constellation itself. So Starlink, for people that may not know, is a satellite constellation that will be about 12,000 satellites in 3 different shells of orbits around Earth. So I think 340 kilometer altitude, 550, and 1,100 kilometers. And what it's essentially going to be doing is providing a communications network that blankets the entire Earth with the capability to send data to Starlink, and then from whatever satellite you send it to, it can be hopped around to whatever satellite it has to reach to be beamed to the location you want to send it. So if I want to text my friend in Japan, and I happen to be in the middle of a national park or something, the idea is that I can have a Wi-Fi connection that is strong enough and secure enough also that I can use the Starlink constellation to be able to send that data. So basically providing a celestial or orbital leg of the internet. So internet handling right now, I believe, is all handled by giant undersea cables that connect the various continents and the various countries of the world to one another. And eventually that winds up at your ISP, who then distributes it out to their customers, you. And so Starlink is basically just another version of that, but in space.
Right.
And so I guess kind of talking about some of, I think, the challenges that might be faced with Starlink. So as I mentioned, it's 12,000 satellites. Technically, it's 11,957, but with some redundancy.
Right.
And there are only about, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 objects in space today that are active. Everything else is just junk. And there are about 30,000 objects that we can track in space. So 28,000 of the things that we can track in space that might be as small as a centimeter, could be as large as a school bus. 28,000 of those are redundant. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting there and posing risk to collide with another satellite and create a field of debris that can hit even more satellites and go on, and that kind of cascading idea is called the Kessler syndrome.
Okay.
So I don't want to be the guy that says, Starlink is bad. It's not bad. I think it's going to do a lot for humanity, as you just mentioned. I mean, first responders in the California wildfires were able to take advantage of Starlink to be able to communicate with one another. You think about all of the complications that could arise from being in forest fire and being trapped, maybe having your signal to a cell tower blocked because the cell tower doesn't have enough reception capability to actually pick up on a signal that's being sent through some cloud of smoke. So constellations like Starlink, I think, are going to be very beneficial, but I think it's something we need to tread very carefully towards. I have not heard a lot about exactly what kind of recycling measures SpaceX is taking to be able to bring the satellites, once they're redundant and at the end of their life, back down to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. There's also been a lot of pushback from the astronomy community because these Starlink satellites are small satellites. I think they're each about 100 to 200 kilograms. but they have these solar panels to be able to power themselves.
Right.
Basically, you have more area of your solar panel, you can get more electricity generated. And that's starting to interfere with some optical astronomy. That's not something I'm too well versed on, but I have heard rumblings of that in the astronomy universe on Twitter.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's something that could really help humanity a lot. And it's definitely, like Gary said, those kinds of ideas are where the money is. Talk about disruption. Imagine disrupting the entire internet.
Right. Yeah.
But it's something we need to tread carefully towards.
Yeah, and on that, one of you worked with UAVs a lot. Is that true? UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, or anything?
Yeah, that's kind of my hobby.
Oh, okay.
As part of the Department of Economic Development, we've been working with UAVs for about the last 10 years.
Well, my question is that goes on with kind of the Starlink thing. I know Facebook was working on kind of the UAV solar aeronautical, I don't know what you want to call them, but they were
looking
internet.
for a high altitude
Yeah.
UAV to just kind of be like a very low altitude satellite.
So does this-
That would stay up there at 60 or 70,000 feet for
Right.
weeks at a time.
So does Starlink then make that?
Kind of obsolete.
Obsolete. Yeah. Okay.
Could be.
Everybody agree with that, or what? I mean, maybe.
Well, it's like, I don't think you can necessarily say anything is obsolete. They're layers.
Right.
And as the demand for communications grows, you have to fill it somehow. And so one way to fill it may be the high altitude drone. Another way might be the Starlink. Another way, as he mentioned, are the undersea cables that carry a tremendous amount of data back and forth. And all of it's being used. And so there's probably an opportunity for virtually all of these things to coexist. I don't think it's an either or choice. I think it's a matching the capability and the cost and the function to the market.
Yeah.
And particular markets will be served better by one format than another.
Nice. All right. Well, so Rohan, I'm going to kind of guide this to you, but I'm sure all of you have had kind of experienced this. So, like from a biological perspective, there are studies that show that more men experience vision loss while in space. So, have you done anything with this? And there's some considerations that you've seen in the news recently of just sending all female crew or all women crew. What are your thoughts on this? And then do you have any personal experience with the research done with kind of eyesight?
Yeah, so in terms of the eyesight, don't have much research in that area, but I think, as NASA and other companies start to explore, who they want their missions and stuff to be crewed by, it's really important to take a look on like the dynamic of, how man and woman kind of work together, right? Naturally, women are going to be better at certain things. Naturally, men are just built a little bit stronger. They might be better at certain other tasks, right?
Yeah.
So I think in terms of, the types of crew that you can have, all male, all female, or having a mix of both, I still think that having a mix is still the best way to go.
Right.
Just because, that provides a more diverse way that you can look at problems, provides, different perspective for sure, which is always good, especially in space, right? When you are, if you're on the moon or on Mars, you have a limited amount of resources, you have a limited things that you can work with. And just, I think providing that different perspective or, having like a different angle is paramount, just to make sure that you can, get past a problem, get past a hurdle.
Yeah.
But in terms of the eyesight that you were talking about earlier, I honestly think you just have to do more research into it in terms of, until you put a woman up there for long periods of time. And that's kind of what the space station is for, right? It's like a mini testing ground, so to speak, of what's going to happen when you go to the moon, when you go to Mars. So I think, giving the women the more opportunity to get into space, encouraging more women to get into STEM, things along those lines will help to give, everyone more idea of what exactly are the risks that are associated with certain medical ailments.
Yeah. Cool.
I'd also
go
like
ahead.
to just throw in a kind of a devil's advocate thing here. There's been a grand total of about 560 people that have gone into orbit, and about 60, and they've all done wonderful jobs. They've all performed marvelously, but it's a very small sample set.
Right.
And particularly in the beginning of the space program, when you're talking about the moon landings and the early Skylab and the shuttle missions and things like that, typically the astronauts were older and had different life experiences. So to try to narrow down the cause and effect to a single variable that says, well, women do better, without considering all the other factors, time in space, time in flight, age, weight. There are a whole bunch of different factors to consider before seizing on one aspect of an individual's capabilities or makeup. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, this question I'm going to give to Blake here real quick. Oh, do you have something to add to that or no?
Yeah, I think I remember looking more into this. Yeah, it's one of those things as like more men have temporarily lost eyesight going into orbit than women, but our sample size is very small, so we don't know much about that yet. But also presents an engineering challenge. You know, if we're going to do a longer term mission, you know, is it easier to actually fix the engineering problem? You know, figure out the particulars behind it. You know, intracranial pressure, stuff like that.
Right.
Or we can just, you know, send women, right? Because they don't have that problem. But there are tons of factors to come into, well, what are going to be, you know, are there going to be any issues with, you know, only sending women, advantages, disadvantages. So it's one of those things that is one of the, like, currently being studied things on the International Space Station.
Right.
And just a very interesting problem. And I think it also points to that, you know, if you want to get involved in the space industry, you don't have to be an aerospace engineer, right? Like, it's going to be a biomedical engineer that's going to be, you know, asking that question and hopefully solving it. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think Rohan gave the best answer. You know, the diversity of the missions, like you're losing out on a lot of data that can be collected when you're not sending kind of a mix of people up there. And we were talking about, you know, you don't have to be, you don't have to be an astronaut to be in the space industry. You know, I see a lot of, there's a lot of movies coming out and shows. You know, botany is a huge thing. You know, people are learning a lot about that. From that and why that's important. So if you want to, you know, survive on other planets, you have to eat and figure out water and stuff like that. But there are a lot of recent shows with space. So from the shuttle program shutting down, kind of a lull and of interest. You can that could be debated, by the way. But with this new interest, maybe SpaceX is pushing that a little bit, and now with what do you call this? Entertainment, kind of pushing that. Do you see a little bit more interest, especially from maybe like younger generations now are looking back and like, well, what do I have to do to get in the space industry? An engineering degree, or what types of degrees? So first question, if anybody wants to answer, have you seen any personal increase of interest in the aeronautical field or the space industry at all within the past 5 years, we'll say?
I mean, I think SpaceX has brought a lot of interest. When I was growing up in high school, and I was telling everyone, "Hey, I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. I'm going to be an aerospace engineer."
Right.
Everyone would say, "Oh yeah, you want to work for NASA?" Well, okay. First off, there's many other companies than just NASA. But now that SpaceX is around, everyone says, "Oh, do you want to work for SpaceX or NASA?"
Right, the two.
So we got the two now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they're super interesting because they're bringing all these new ideas. The revival of the moon program for sure is bringing up a lot of new interest. Actually having very unique ideas coming from SpaceX, reusability, being able to get back into space. We're now again bringing U.S. astronauts to the International Space Station using U.S. rockets. So, while, it's getting up there one way or the other, whether it be with a Russian rocket or a U.S. rocket, it's depends on who we're paying, but
Right.
it's just brought so much more interest of that, and you're kind of seeing the same thing that was happening around, when Mercury started. We're like, oh my gosh, we're putting astronauts in orbit now, that's crazy. And then all of a sudden Apollo happened. They're like, oh my gosh, we're at least, going to the moon, and then they finally stepped on the moon. So it's almost the same thing that's happening again, except NASA's trying to kind of like find the, like, redoing it again, but having it be a more interesting experience. How can we actually have a permanent presence on the moon? How can we use it as a step to get to Mars? So lots of new interest there, and definitely hope that this time there's a follow through from like, all right, we're getting to the moon, but that's just the beginning of our now new permanent presence deeper into space.
Yeah. Gary, I know you had a story about that with the shutdown of one of the programs and the interest into the the education side. Could you tell the group that real quick for everybody?
Well, sure. For as long as I've been alive, aerospace has always been a cyclical thing. And I was telling the guys here on the panel before we started, when I started as an undergraduate in the 70s, we had 110 people in my class at Georgia Tech, and by the end of the first quarter at the time, because of some developments in the aerospace industry, we went from 110 to 20, and then the 20 became 14 or 15.
Right.
And then it built back up. I mean, Georgia Tech now, as the undergrads, there are 700 or 800 students. Yeah. So there is plenty of interest in aerospace. But it is still kind of a niche thing because a lot of people don't relate to aerospace affecting their everyday life.
Right.
And when the space program was going on in the 60s, I mean, NASA spent a great deal of effort to try to make those connections and show people that, the camcorders and the computers and Velcro and all of those things came out of the research. And that has kind of quieted down over the past 10 or 20 years. They still occasionally get the astronauts on television, showing some stuff, but it's kind of a low bubble. And so, there's a fraction of kids that are interested in STEM and want to be astronauts, but it's not. It could be better. I'll put it that way.
Well. If you can say something, but do you have any favorite? Are you watching any of these new shows? I know there's ONeil, there's Space Force, there was some movies going to space.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo. I think the renewed interest, I guess, in the entertainment industry, creating more space, I guess, theme shows. For me personally, Space Force was, I guess, pretty entertaining to watch. But I think, kind of like what you said, a lot of the public doesn't have a really good idea about what aerospace engineers really do. You say aerospace engineer, someone like, oh, cool, like you build rockets, right? Like,
that's all you do, right?
Right, and it's way more than that, right? And I think it serves as a way for the public to get a better understanding of what kind of goes behind the scenes, but also a good way of, creating that kind of, I guess, curious thinking mode for the public of, what is NASA doing now, right? There's a movement back a couple years ago to what exactly is NASA even up to these days, right? They're not launching. The shuttle program is gone. They're not really launching stuff anymore. Like, why exactly exist, right? So I think this is a good way to get the public kind of behind the Artemis program and kind of renew that public interest of like, oh, hey, cool, like we're going back to the moon. Like, what does that mean? Like, are we just gonna, step foot on it and come back home? Like, I think that's a good way of kind of getting the public back into that mindset of kind of like a mini space race, so to speak.
Yeah.
But you're asking for favorite space series and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The Expanse that's on Amazon and some other things is fascinating to me because it really shows a really future view of what it could be like, and the way they pilot the ships and clank around in their spacesuits and all of that is just really, really riveting and really interesting. But again, it's something that's out there in the future, and it's going to be a long future. It's not going to be next week.
Right. Well, so we'll go to this question here. Let me pull it up. This is from the live stream. This is from Sanjay. What do you see, as we're wrapping up here, what do you see as the biggest challenge in the aerospace industry right now in 2020? And I think I'll get your opinion from each one of you. So what is the biggest challenge in aerospace right now? This will be worth 20 points.
Well, I'll start with the easy
Go
stuff.
ahead.
Because of the pandemic, the commercial aviation ground to an absolute halt. In April of this year, the Atlanta airport had 5% of they had the previous April. And it's gotten a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a very slow climb back to where we were last year. So as that goes, then, the advances in commercial aircraft are going to be pushed out because the airlines don't have any money to buy the new airplanes. There will probably be kind of a jump in 5 to 10 years where they probably won't want to bring back all the old stuff, and it'll be a perfect opportunity to inject something new. But the problem with that is that the major airframe builders don't have the capital on hand to do that right now. So it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride for commercial aviation. And because they consume so much of the energy, if you will, of engineering and engineers and technicians, we're going to have to find other things to occupy our thinking and creativity, and that's where urban air mobility and some of the other things will probably spool in and fill the gap. And then, of course, all the space stuff that's coming with all the companies that you're talking about, SpaceX, Virgin, Blue Origin. They're all going to start doing stuff, and NASA is doing some pretty cool stuff in terms of designing missions where they're just going to send cargo to the moon and let it sit there for a while, and that sort of thing in preparation for the Artemis program. So there's going to be a little bit of a burble, but like everything else for the last 100 years in aviation, it'll dip and then it'll climb back.
All right. Next, what's the biggest problem you see facing?
I am raring to go for this. So this is interesting, what I see. I'm really interested in, larger payloads, deeper space exploration. Like I said, a lot of my background was on researching into Titan missions, which you need a pretty big rocket to go that far.
How big?
Very big. It's all, if you want to bring something bigger or farther, you got to have, larger and larger. And this is something that's been kind of coming for a few years. So up until recently, the largest rocket ever built was the Saturn V, which took us to the moon. And I remember getting really excited when they announced the new rocket. So NASA is building the what was it
Space
called?
Launch System.
Space Launch System, SLS, yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, we're building something bigger than the Saturn V. This is great. And then 2 more companies said that they're building something bigger than the Saturn V. We have the BFR with Big Falcon rocket.
Yep.
New Glenn.
And the New Glenn, yeah. So the very interesting thing is how, in the aerospace industry, we look a lot at history and, how did it go in the past? Why did we need a big rocket like the Saturn V? Well, because we were going to the moon. That's very important. But we had one, and the Russians had one, and we weren't using the Russians back then, so we only had need for one. And now we have 3. So one of them is made by the U.S. government, and the other 2 are made by private companies. I personally think that all 3 of them will have different uses, but we're seeing a very interesting time now where we have 3 of the largest rockets ever made. And it's almost overwhelming because it's like, oh my gosh, like we've never had, this much capability to, do really awesome large space missions, but now we have triple the amount. So does that mean triple the amount of space missions? I don't know. I really hope so. But it could also mean, maybe we have a little bit too many. So to me, that's as far as like space industry goes. I think it's going to be interesting how those three compete with each other and what types of missions each one will do.
Yeah.
I think going off quickly of what Gary and Blake have both said, this is a really exciting time for anybody to be getting into the space industry or the aerospace industry at large. And one of the things Blake mentioned earlier is that we need everyone. Literally everyone that we can get. It doesn't matter what you study. It doesn't matter what kind of a degree you've had. It doesn't matter where you're from. But we're kind of at this awkward moment. If you think about where you want to see humanity in 200, 300 years, maybe something very sci-fi-esque like The Expanse. Maybe not with the, coronavirus in space kind of plot line, but it's, something similar, right? Where we have extensive economic development and extensive human presence all throughout our solar system. Who doesn't want to see that? I mean, that's
right.
Awesome. But it's a really awkward time right now because I think we're at an inflection point where what we do in the next 10 to 20 years really sets the tone for the rest of the century. We got to the moon in 1969, and we haven't done anything as impressive since. We really dropped the ball after that, and it's been 51 years. I think a lot of the challenge that comes with having to work in the space industry and manage everything is really, I think, coming from the fact that we have to balance. These are a lot of the technology that you develop in aerospace is sensitive to national security. Hypersonics, Gary mentioned Hermeus, a company here in Atlanta, a startup that are making hypersonic passenger jets. Well, what happens when you strap a nuclear warhead to the front of that? You now have a hypersonic missile. Same thing with rockets. The only difference between Saturn V and an ICBM is that Saturn V doesn't come back down with a bomb on top. I think that that's something that we need to address is how can we carefully balance the fact that all of this is very national security sensitive technology, but we also need to be pushing hard. We need to be getting as many people in this field as we can. It's difficult because we have to limit what kind of people can work in the space industry in the United States. If you're a foreign national, and I have plenty of friends that study aerospace with me at Georgia Tech that are foreign nationals, it's very difficult to do anything. I don't have the answer. I don't know if anybody does, but I would say that's one of the biggest challenges that at least the space industry faces, and maybe to an extent as well, the aerospace industry is addressing that balance and where the balance really is.
Yeah. Well,
and I think
go ahead.
Quickly jump in, then kind of bounce off what you said. There's so many different systems. It's unlikely that one company is just going to do everything, for all the way from launch to landers to rovers, things like that. So I think coordinating all the different systems of all the different companies, make sure they communicate together in an efficient and productive way is going to be something that's going to be difficult. When you have a lot of private companies doing their own thing, they kind of tunnel into their own little hole, and they don't really look out and kind of see what other people are doing or trying to integrate their systems with other people. So I think trying to coordinate that is going to be a challenge, especially because by that time everything is going to be completed, right? So you're going to have to kind of maybe go back a little bit, figure out how to integrate things together and weave things together, and then move forward from there. So I think that'll be an interesting problem, and curious to see that solution turns out.
And there's a historical analog here that if you think way back to the 1600s, when countries wanted to explore the oceans, it was the king or the government that sponsored the mission, and you sponsor the mission to the New World. And it wasn't until they brought information back that other people said, there's something here, for us. And they sponsored private voyages across the ocean. And, for the first 100 years, that was a pretty dicey operation. But then, that spawned design of new ships, design of new ways to propel the ships and navigate the ships. And pretty soon you had, ships going back and forth across the Atlantic basis. And so it's going to be kind of like that, as long as there's a pull on the other end. It's one thing to go to Mars, and it's one thing to be able to say, oh boy, it's really cool, but that only gets you so far. There has to be another purpose to go there.
Right. Yeah.
And once that purpose is figured out, then it will pull the technology and the people and the money with it.
Yeah, I mean, to your point earlier with you have now multiple companies that can go up in the United States. All I can think about is the premise of that the older space movie Armageddon, they only had, they were in trouble, so they had to send the only two craft that we had up at the same time. So it's pretty funny. But we have another question, and then we'll shortly wrap up after this. But there's two questions in there. I'm putting them up on the screen now. I know you talked a little bit about misconceptions with, and I'll read it to you so you don't have to squint your eyes over there. But there's misconceptions with the aerospace industry, commercial flight, space travel. What are some of the biggest ones? If you haven't said it already, you don't have to do certain things. There's all sorts of ways in. And on that, Anita asks, what's your biggest piece of advice for an undergraduate student who's looking to set themselves up for success in the aerospace industry?
I think maybe the biggest misconception that, again, in my very limited professional and academic experience that I've seen, is that people come into the aerospace engineering program, both at Georgia Tech or at any other school, or they go into industry or they go into academia, and I think people have a very rosy picture. I think people think they're gonna hop out of bed every day, they're gonna love what they're doing, every single part of the job is, super cool, and
right.
something out of sci-fi. I think
Isn't
it's, well, it is cool. I think there's kind of two ways to think about it. I started at Georgia Tech in fall of 2016, not knowing anything about aerospace, and I graduated last spring, so May 2020, so 4 years. And it's, when you see how the sausage is made, when the curtain is pulled back, you see what's really behind the magic trick. I think there are two kinds of responses. I think some people are like, wow, that's not magic, that's not cool, I've lost my interest, it's lost its glamour. And I think another crowd of people are like, wow, that's not magic, but wow, I can do this. It's not, I know the science, I understand how the sausage is made. And I think that, you need to, I guess kind of answering both of the questions at the same time, the advice I would give to people that are wanting to get into the aerospace industry, or space specifically, which is what I can speak to, come in prepared to work hard, prepared to learn everything you can learn. I mean, be a sponge, absorb all the information you can, learn everything there is to learn about your niche in the industry, learn everything there is to know about what kind of commercial efforts or governmental efforts are backing whatever it is you're working on. All the boring stuff too, hit the textbooks, do well in your courses, or if you're not in school and you're going into the industry, don't be afraid to ask questions. Reach out to the people that know more than you, because they're probably going to be one of the best sources of knowledge that you can approach readily, and learn from. And that's the way that you do the magic. And once you can do it, I think you gain a new appreciation for it, when you know that it's not sexy in the same way, it's sexy in a different way.
Right. Yep. So you got to put in the work. Sounds like. Anybody else with misconceptions or advice for undergraduates looking to do well? Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I think kind of echoing what you said earlier, not every day as an aerospace engineer is Houston, we have a problem, right? There's going to be days where you're, maybe sitting at your lab, sitting at a desk, really grinding some numbers, crunching some math. But of course you'll have some days where stuff does hit the fan and you have to figure it out in a time-sensitive manner, right? But I think that kind of just leads to the development of trying to be as adaptable as possible as an undergraduate student, as a graduate student. I think just as a human being in society, right? The more adaptable you are, the better you are at facing new problems, facing new challenges. And I think especially for undergraduate students, the biggest the hardest time we have is finding internships, because we don't have research or things like that to kind of help pad our resume, so to speak. Right. So I think being adaptable, taking whatever opportunities come your way. If you're an aerospace engineer but you happen to get a mechanical engineering internship or an electrical engineering internship, go ahead and take those, because you're building experience. In my opinion, any experience is good experience. And kind of talked about earlier, the aerospace industry is not just about building rockets. There's so much to it, right? There's biomed, there's mechanical, there's the world is pretty much your oyster in that way. So
yeah.
Just 30 more seconds. I agree with everything that they've said, and we touched on it earlier. In order to be an aerospace engineer, you have to have a lot of different skill sets, and it gives you options, right? Your ability to synthesize and analyze a problem can be applied anywhere. I left Georgia Tech with an aero degree. I went to Monterey and got another set of aero degrees there. And so, for example, the Navy in its wisdom, immediately sent me to a ship. Right? Yeah. And here I am with a master's in aerospace engineering. I want to go do aerospace engineering. I ended up on a ship. And 3 weeks after reporting on board the ship, the CO said, "We're going to put you in charge of putting the engine room back together." And I'm like, okay, it's just a big engine, and so the things that I had learned in thermo and mechanical, the mechanical engineering, it all fit and it all helped. 8 years later, I end up in the Pentagon, and my mission was to run the finances of the aviation aspect of the Navy.
Yeah.
There's no engineering in that.
Right.
But again, the skill set of just being able to figure out what the issue is, figure out how to solve the problem, all came from that engineering background. And so what you learn as an aerospace engineer can be applied in a dozen different places, and it gives you the option to be able to choose along the way. And so you're not locked into, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to work for NASA and they didn't offer me a job, my life is over. No, not even a tiny bit. You have a whole bunch of other things that you can jump into that you don't even think about.
Yeah, I know you were talking about the sexiness of it, but when I see aerospace engineering degree on a resume, I'm like, I just go, oh, okay. Or even your bios that I was reading through earlier, it's just like, oh, smart people, intimidating. But it does sound like the skill sets that you do get with that apply to multiple industries. So kind of good backup for jobs. So any other advice?
Yeah, I got one. So one of the most frustrating things that I always see on Facebook is when people make the comments, "Oh, we have so many problems here. Why are we going to space?"
Oh, yes. Please answer that.
And I mean, some of them are extremely misguided. Like they'll post a picture of a rocket being like, "Look at all of this pollution." That's literally water vapor for most rockets.
Right.
You can look up the formula. But just how much you can do to help prevent climate change by being in the aerospace industry. We literally have satellites that are tracking deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. We have satellites that track wildfires across, every single part of the world. You can do so much. It doesn't even have to be space necessarily. If you're designing airplanes, you can bring down emissions. And that's something that even has a business case. If you're an airline and you want to burn less fuel, you get more profit, right? But also you pollute less. So very important. But it's amazing. And honestly, in the research that I've done, that I have known has had a very good climate impact. Honestly, I feel so good from that, even beyond the recycling that I do myself when I think, wow, I really helped, activate the technology that might be needed to, enable electric aviation, right? So I think you can do a lot of climate good in that. And as far as how to get into the industry, pick something that you like. It doesn't have to be necessarily, I can do the math well, but pick something specific about the aerospace industry that you like, whether you like making rocket engines or you like designing aircraft, or whether it be structures or propulsion systems, any of that sort of stuff, and just try to keep on pursuing that no matter what. If you can't get sponsored research in it, maybe take a class in it, reach out, network, anything that you can do just to do little steps in the direction that you need. It might not be everything that you're doing in aerospace at that time, but the more actions that you can take to get those specific projects that you want, the better, and it'll help you really start building a resume in that area and really get towards what exactly you want to do in the aerospace industry.
Nice. Well, thank you. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and this will be your opportunity to pitch anything if you want. I'm not sure if you have anything to say, or if you need anything, if you need to ask anybody anything. But what programs would you suggest for anybody that's interested in getting more involved in the aerospace industry, aside from college classes. So are there any clubs or programs or even websites that people should take a look at? And then any closing thoughts, and we'll start with you.
Sure. So, word of warning here, I'm completely biased. Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. If you're a college student and your school has a SEDS chapter, join it. You don't need to be an aerospace engineer. You don't need to know anything about space. It's a great platform to meet other students and meet professionals in the industry that will later serve as a great network to get involved in whatever field you find yourself working in. It's also just a really fun time. If you're not in college, then what I recommend is find conferences that are near you or are happening in your country and see if you can just offer to volunteer, helping out, setting up logistics or setting up sound systems. I did that, granted through SEDS, I did that for the New Space Conference that happens every year in Seattle. It's kind of a focus on space startups, and that was a great way to meet people. So just things like that, like be as aggressive as you can with networking. SEDS is great, but there are other similar kinds of organizations. SWISE is a new one, Society of Women in Space Engineering. WOA is another one that I think was started at Georgia Tech, Women of Aeronautics and Astronautics. But there are a ton that are general, and I think just, join whatever appeals to you and have fun with it too. I mean, the point of being in a club or an organization, especially as a college student, isn't just being professional and showing up with a tie and resume workshops. Like, you get to meet people and you build lasting relationships and friendships with those people. Gary and I actually met because I went to a legislative day at the Georgia State Capitol 2 years ago, and I remembered as soon as I saw him, oh, you're that guy that I met at the Capitol 2 years ago. Nice. That was an event that I found out about through SEDS. So it's not, I think there are a lot of different ways that you can get involved. So join whatever organizations out there, take advantage of as many of the opportunities as you can. And yeah, 100% network aggressively.
Nice. Blake, any parting words and any extracurricular activities people should do?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those organizations were really important for sure. Like I said, you do not have to be an aerospace engineer to get into the aerospace industry. Actually, most of the people hired in the aerospace industry are actually computer scientists or mechanical engineers. So you don't even have to be anything near that. Get interested in any way possible. If you don't necessarily just like reading papers all the time to learn about the physics that are behind aerospace, I don't know, get into video games. Literally half of my colleagues, most of their orbital mechanics knowledge is from a video game called Kerbal Space Program. So yeah, I see a lot of nods.
Yeah. That gives you an amazing understanding of orbital mechanics.
So, but just get interested. Definitely look out. There's tons of different organizations, SEDS, AIAA, all that sorts of stuff if you want to get more involved. Network. And just figure out where your place is, because if it isn't in, if you're not doing exactly what an aerospace engineer does, it's okay. You probably still fit somewhere.
Nice. Yeah, so Rohan, any closing advice for the clubs, the Kerbal Space Program? You can second that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of you guys have said pretty much everything on par. The one, I guess, organization I'd add is AIAA. It's like the Society for Aerospace Engineers, and it's like professional society. They hold conferences, I think, almost yearly, if not every couple months, focused on different topics and things like that. But I think in terms of, the college experience, I think just reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I've done it multiple times. If there's a company that I'm interested in, I'll like search up the company name and then filter by like GT alumni, for an example, and just shoot them a quick message on LinkedIn and be like, hey, saw your profile, super interested. Can I set up just a quick couple minutes to reach out to you and pick your brain a little bit? And most of the time, being, I guess, an alumni at Georgia Tech, they become a little more receptive to it and are more willing to respond to you. So I think just, don't be afraid to reach out to people. If you see someone who's like in your dream job, reach out to him or her and see, how they got there and what you can learn from them as well.
Yeah, communications. And we'll end it with you. Is there any, anything locally in Atlanta, any other networking groups that you know about?
They've said it all. I would underscore the AIAA connection, because I've been a member of that since I graduated in the 70s. And that's where all the technical stuff happens. So I would pay attention to that. But there are dozens of opportunities, not only at Georgia Tech, but all the other schools. The UAV design, build, fly, and all kinds of challenges and other kinds of competitions. So, you can find one if you look for it. You won't have to look for more than about 20 minutes to find one you like.
All right. Well, we'll end it there. I want to thank everybody, especially our panelists, Phil, Blake, Rohan, and Gary. And thank you for watching those live stream, and thank you for asking the questions. This has been super helpful. We're going to write a blog post about this. Again, we're at Tech Square ATL Social Club. You can go to TechSquareATL.com. We are a membership program. You can co-work here, socially distanced, and and make some good connections. So I want to thank you guys again, and you can email us if you have any questions about the stream or you want to connect to any of the panelists. Just let us know. hello@TechSquareATL.com.
In my buzz, locking eyes, we just touch, feel our bodies drifting up. I don't know around you, I'm just trying to lose myself. I know that I just can't trust you, but you know me like no one else. Stuck up